There once was a time when human beings did not merely inhabit the world, they entered it. Dawn was not only morning, it was arrival. Bread was not only nourishment, it was covenant between earth, labor, fire and hand. To cross a doorway, to bury the dead, to marry, to feast, to plant, to mourn, to crown a ruler, to speak before the tribe. None of these acts were considered psychologically casual. They belonged to the architecture of existence itself. Ancient civilizations understood something modernity has nearly forgotten. A culture survives not merely through laws or technology, but through shared symbolic participation in reality. Ritual once structured perception. It taught the human being how to stand inside time. Ancient people were not primitive. They understood thresholds with a sophistication today's civilization may need to remember for its own survival. They understood that consciousness changes when an act is approached with form, attention, rhythm, and symbolic gravity. A fire approached ceremonially is no longer merely heat. Silence approached consciously is no longer merely absence. A gathering approached ritually becomes more than social interaction. It becomes orientation. Our modern world dissolved many of these structures in the name of efficiency, rationality, and progress. Yet what disappeared with ritual was not merely spiritual belief. Something far more subtle vanished. The experience of meaningful transition. The human capacity to encounter life as sacred threshold rather than continuous consumption. Without thresholds, everything collapses into sameness. Meals become consumption. Rest becomes distraction. Speech becomes endless reaction. Travel becomes movement without pilgrimage. Even intimacy becomes severed from reverence. A civilization without ritual slowly loses its symbolic depth perception. And when symbolic consciousness weakens, the human being begins to experience life as flat matter rather than living correspondence. This is why many people today possess information yet remain existentially disoriented. They have accumulated data but lost initiation. They move constantly yet rarely arrive inwardly anywhere. Ritual once reminded human beings that existence itself was participatory, that the visible world was never only visible, that how one entered an act shaped what the act became. The tragedy is not merely that ritual disappeared. It is that modern culture often mistakes its disappearance for evolution. But the hunger returns. It returns precisely through the acts modern people often dismiss as aesthetic preference, wellness culture, or personal atmosphere. Because beneath them lives a deeper need the soul can no longer properly name. A civilization that has forgotten ritual does not stop longing for it. It simply begins searching for it unconsciously. And so the return appears indirectly, through the craving for slowness in a culture addicted to acceleration, through candles lit without fully understanding why flame alters perception, through the longing for silence amidst endless exposure, through the resurgence of sacred architecture, ancestral memory, pilgrimage, ceremonial meals, intentional gatherings, seasonal living, contemplative spaces, devotional music, poetic speech, sacred aesthetics, ritualized beauty, and forms of presence that attempt to restore atmosphere to existence. Many seek these things without yet possessing the symbolic language to articulate what they are truly seeking. And because modern consciousness often lacks initiatory understanding, the longing frequently re-emerges in fragmented or spiritually bypassed forms, reduced to trend, lifestyle, consumption, performance, or vague spirituality, severed from disciplined symbolic depth. Yet beneath even these distortions remains something profoundly real: the human desire to encounter life ceremonially again. The soul attempts to restore a threshold wherever civilization has erased it. Because ritual, at its highest form, is not performance. It is the shaping of consciousness through reverent participation. And perhaps this is why the modern human being feels exhausted even amidst abundance. They have inherited stimulation without initiation, access without orientation, exposure without consecration. A life without thresholds eventually becomes difficult to feel. Not because life loses beauty, but because nothing prepares the soul to encounter it. In such a case, the return of sacred ritual becomes not a trend, but a civilizational reconfiguration. For the soul continually attempts to rebuild ritual wherever modernity has stripped the world of sacred form.